I'm going to also start with some poetry because I feel it always helps everything. We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time, which is from T.S. Eliot, The Four Quartets. And what I'm going to do this morning in the always wise words of Pippa Evans is state my obvious. And it does feel obvious to me, but it may not feel at all obvious to some of you. And it feels really quite risky and vulnerable because I am going to talk not about spirituality, although that is something I am very pro and involved in, and I know many of you are very comfortable with, not even about faith, not even about religion in general, but about Christianity in particular. And I'm going to do that partly because I don't really have a right to speak on behalf of any other religions. There are people in this room with rich knowledge and wisdom in Buddhism. I know that there will be people in this network or people you know who can talk to you about why they love Islam or Judaism or Hinduism and the riches that they think those traditions bring to the world, but that's not me. And so I'm going to talk from my point of view and from my perspective. And also bearing in mind, I sort of agree with Susan Sontag, who says that you can't speak religions in the same way that you can't speak language. You can speak French or German or Italian. And there is a kind of inner and internal logic to these faith traditions, to these stories, to these communities, to these narratives that I worry sometimes in our right desire to be inclusive, we zoom out and put everything in a kind of bucket labelled religions, and there is a risk to that we lose particularity, that we assume more similarity that there is, and we just don't listen to the integrity or the voice or the tune that's being sung. And so I'm going to try to sing a bit of that tune this morning, and I do it with nerves because I spend a lot of time in spaces like this and love them and feel very privileged to be part of them. And I have observed that lots and lots of people with a desire to change the world or activists who feel a strong sense of the burden of the grief of the world often have some religion in their childhood. If I ever do a PhD, I might do a research project on the proportional difference, because I think there is something in the shaping of religion in your childhood that has a connected DNA with people who then maybe reject that for themselves, but go on to be in these spaces. So as I'm speaking, I'm aware there's probably quite a lot of you who may have some resonance around this subject, and it won't all be positive resonance. You may have bruises. You may carry, you may feel triggered by the fact that I've even put this in the place. You may already be feeling a bit tense in your chair, a little bit hostile towards me, and I can cope with that. I'm really used to it, and it's okay. Like, if you feel cross with me, I'm all right. Like, feel that. It's okay, I get it. There are some really good reasons for that. When you put Christianity in a space, it drags with it this legacy of colonialism and homophobia and patriarchy and all these associations that we have with this word. Part of what I feel like my life's calling is to uncouple some of it and keep going back to a brown, marginalized man who was illiterate in the Middle East, who gathered around him women and sick people and the dispossessed and the oppressed, and from them started a movement that changed the world and overturned the center of colonial power. But we have to admit, history hasn't always shown up like that, right? This song hasn't always been told like that. This story has not always been told like that. It carries sharp things and painful things. And so I just want to name it and say, I'm okay. I am going to try and speak the life and the gift and the power and the beauty and the love of this song. But if you hear discordant notes, that's okay. Like, I can hold the tension. It's all right. We can hold the tension as a group. So I'm going to start from saying that I think Christianity is a gift and not a threat, a friend and not a foe, or at least much of it is. The lived experience of the millions of people around the world is not the very painful and obvious places where there is deep dysfunction. And I think of the brown children dug up in Canada in a Catholic orphanage recently. I think of Catholic abuse scandals. I think of all these things that we have to always hold in tension with what I'm saying. But I want to broaden it and say, for the millions, billions of people around the world from this tradition, there is life and goodness and beauty, and I think particularly salient, relevant, helpful treasures for these crises that we're facing, for these meta-crises that Jonathan has so helpfully unpacked. So a gift, not a threat, a friend, not a foe. And I also want to frame this by saying, I just want to change the choice architecture a little bit. I want to make this, put it back on the table of things that we might pick up. And I don't want to say tools because that's too mechanistic or economistic, but crafts, stories, myths. And I have a friend called Sally Phillips who did a lecture for Theos about disability and Down syndrome, and she talks about informed choice, and she's pro-choice. She understands there's good reasons for abortion sometimes, but she says when you have a Down syndrome pregnancy, the supposed informed choice is not actually informed. What you get is a litany of medical risk and quite a strong steering towards a Down syndrome pregnancy being something that you might not want to continue. And her work is just broadening that choice to tell also the tales of life and laughter and goodness of families with Down syndrome, members, the ways that suffering and challenge can actually deepen your understanding of life, can change the course of your life in really positive ways. And so part of my calling is just to change the choice architecture, to say yes risk, yes problem, yes challenge, yes and other stories, deeper, broader, richer stories that I just want to be in the mix. I just want to change the choice architecture a little bit. And so I'm just going to say a few simple things that I think Christianity has to offer for our moment, for our crises. And I'm going to say now that the last thing I'm going to talk about is God, and I'm going to try and use a range of language around spirit, maybe big mind and big heart, or the transcendent other, so that as many of you who want to can find a way into that language, but this is my duty of care saying we're going to get there, and it's a trigger warning because for some of you that question has been live and painful for you and you feel like it's closed for you and you would really rather not have the plaster taken off. Thank you very much. And I get that, and that's fine. And for some of you, maybe for everyone, asking this question of, is there an other? Is there a love beyond us? Is there meaning? Is there someone who sees and who I can see? It can't help but be can't help but be emotional firestorm at some level. So that's where we're headed. If you need to slip out, it's totally fine. So I'm going to start with something we're going to go soft, we're going to go gentle, we're going to do low-hanging fruit communities. Christianity builds durable communities based on covenantal commitments. And more people in these spaces I know are finding this sense of we can't do it as individuals, we can't necessarily even do it as movements or organizations. What we need are small groups, congregations, committed groups of people who know each other, who travel with each other, who challenge each other and support each other and encourage each other. And that's what churches are. Church is like a shameful secret. I sometimes feel I bloody love church. I have missed church so much in lockdown. It broke my heart. When I walk into my church, the sense of homecoming and knownness, and a place where I can healthily process all the stuff that's happened in the week and have a cry and have a sing and get a hug and hear a story, it's where I emotionally recalibrate and reset. The ritual and the moment and the story is an amazing container. And it is a set of people. And even the most mediocre church is usually a kind of ragtag, at least semi-multi-generational, multi-background group of people who've been given a reason and a framework for the hard work of loving each other long term. They show up each week and we remind each other that it is God's will, and that can be like a bit of a sledgehammer, or it can be an invitation, that they are called to submit to each other, to serve each other, to cry together, to laugh together, to forgive each other. And we read the New Testament, which is basically a bunch of letters between these communities. And the more I read them, the more I'm like, this is fascinating. It's so real. At the beginning, it'd be like, oh, say hi to Barry and John. And could you pass on thanks to that bloke and remind him that I borrowed the Tupperware and I'll give it back. And here's all the stuff about the story of God. And at the end, it's like, Phyllis and Janice, stop squabbling. It's all right. Remember that you love each other. Get over it. It's very real. It's very earthy. It's very... Communities are hard. Communities are annoying. Communities are a lot of rotors. But underneath them is beauty and power. And I think they're good for the people that belong to them, but I also think churches are extraordinary... that can be and often are extraordinary centres of kind of innovation and social justice energy. And that's not often seen because the branding is terrible and they don't know how to tell the stories. But the research we did at Theos shows that the vast majority of local social justice service in communities, you'll find churches all over it. They're either driving it or they're partnering it or they're sending their volunteers to do it. And they often are embarrassed to talk about it, but that's why they're there. They're there because the scriptures that they read say, go love your neighbour, go feed the hungry, go clothe the naked, go visit those in prison. And they are imperfectly trying to work out how you do that in like 21st century Hertfordshire. You know, they are running food banks and then paralysed by doubt about whether they should be running a food bank. And why are they food banks? And then they're trying to campaign against food banks. And then they're trying to run the food bank. And then they're knackered. And they're also visiting the sick. And they are, welcoming mums and toddlers. And I think it's not that Christians are better people. They're really not. And that's okay theologically. That's assumed and baked in. Jesus says, I come not for the well, for the sick. Like the church should be a hospital, not a kind of group of elect, pure people. But, and I'm going to use the word spiritual technologies with some nervousness because there is a tendency to sort of go, oh, there's a spiritual technology we can sort of asset strip from religion and apply over here, which sometimes can be done well and sometimes can be done badly. But spiritual technology of the institution means that you can join a church and go, what's already being done and how can I be a part of it? There are existing institutions, existing practices, centuries of history, stories that frame it, lessons that have been learned. That just makes it really... Oh, sorry, was that a knock on the... No, good. Hello, come in. Is that you, God? The bar isn't so high, and you're doing it with other people, and it just... It seems slightly easier. And the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury is obviously a key example of this. This is his library, Bible. And we know him as one of the great social transformers ever in the UK. And he set up animal charities and he helped reform labour conditions and he worked with child labour and he was very involved with Wilberforce in overturning slavery. And I'm sure that he had moments of being really shitty and horrible. And there will be ways he's a terrible person, but he was part of a movement that transformed Victorian society at the time, led by a bunch of evangelicals who got together and read this book and said, I don't want this social fig leaf of kind of privileged Christianity. I want to work out if we can actually apply the words of Jesus now. And they utterly and completely transformed the world. And they did it together. And I just think when social justice movements think whatever the problems of the world are, the answer isn't Christianity, we're missing something. Maybe I'm not saying the whole answer is Christianity, but part of the answer might be this story, this tradition, this call, this deeply uncomfortable challenge to lay down our lives, to seek the good of others. That's community. Narrative. We are story-making creatures. We need to be part of a story and a purpose. And without a bigger story, and I think we see this everywhere, we tend to feel like we need to create our own, to make ourselves the heroes and heroines, to make our transformation, overcoming, realization, the whole story. And I and others have often felt ourselves crushed by the weight of that. It is too much for every life to be the story. And I have found the Christian story holds together my desire to matter as myself. It says I matter, that I am loved and seen and known, intended, designed, good work prepared in advance for me to do. But my story is not the whole story, that there is a bigger story in which my story is an important part, a narrative arc that I can join, an invitation to participate in a great struggle for the good, in which injustice and evil are real and must be resisted, and which we may be lost and we may be asked to lay down our lives. But at the end of all things is the hope of a restoration and a homecoming and a reconciliation. Whose story to be part of. A container for suffering and failure that doesn't snuff out hope. A central symbol of Christianity is a torture device. It's a really weird thing to wear as jewellery. really weird. Like, we've totally disassociated from the original meaning of the symbol semiotically. The cross is a very strange thing going on in our culture. This is a symbol that puts suffering and death at the center of the story. It's not denied or downplayed or tied up with a neat bow. And this is why Nietzsche hated Christianity, right? It says, stop wallowing in suffering, stop sticking with pain, pick yourself up, overcome. Don't walk with the weak and identify with the suffering, but you can be, I see so many echoes in the transhumanism of the moment. Be strong and overcome death, overcome suffering, move forward, ignore weakness. That is not Christianity. Christianity is the least transhumanist thread there's ever been. I'm going to actually quote you, Jonathan, who wrote, "Easter is for grown-ups. These ideas are deep and dark and difficult, and they make most sense to those who have been around the block enough to deeply know pain and recovery from pain, and recognize this recurring pattern in our lives and the lives of others." Mina said the other day that one of the key themes of her life is Weltschmerz, world pain, identifying with world pain, and it was a very powerful thing for me. And one of the ways that I find Christianity life-giving is it holds Weltschmerz in the heart of God. It doesn't give an answer to it. The intellectual, I can't remember who said, there is no neat answer to the problem of pain. And I don't think Christianity gives one. But what it says is that God, the Spirit, the love logic of the universe, comes close to it, lives with it, weeps with us, knows pain. And that helps me. A Christian anthropology helps a lot too. I think there is a kind of understanding that Christianity tells us that we are sinful and terrible and should be racked with guilt for all time. And that's the whole of Christian anthropology. What I found is actually it starts with human beings as relationship. The Trinity is a weird thing, but I get my head around it by the understanding that a Trinitarian God means that relationship pre-exists everything else. That within the heart of God is a conversation and a dance and a love and relationship. And that when we say we're made in the image of God, that's what comes through. We are inherently social and interconnected. We are not individuals. We are persons in relationship. And that when Jesus says the most important commandments are love God and love people, it acknowledges that. Connection that way, connection this way, and this way, and this way, and this way. And that is the whole definition of a good life. There's lots of other things I could say about sin. I think when we hear entangled or complicit or, the heart of the human problem runs through the human heart, that is theology. There are no good guys and bad guys. There are just us. And confession and repentance and forgiveness as a cycle that helps us live in that tension is another thing I found incredibly life-giving. And I'm just going to finish with the G-bomb. The question mark, the absent presence or presence absence, the divine spirit, objective transcendence, big mind or big heart. Rowan Williams defines God as the other who does not compete, with whom I don't have to and can't bargain, the other beyond violence, the regard that will not be evaded or deflected, yet has and seeks no advantage. John Moriarty, in his book Nostos, wrote that he was in search of a truth he would surrender to. And it helped me recently when someone said that good studies that have looked at these moments of intimacy and encounter with God. And I became a Christian by going, well, God, if you're really real, show me. And then being knocked out, an ecstatic experience of the love of God. There was a breaking in that has shaped my life. But when they try and do brain scans of people in deep prayer or transcendence or a sense of encounter with God, the language center of the brain is really not doing very much at all. And it really helped me because I was like, why can't I talk about this? Why do we not see it in novels and stories? Why is this mystical sense of there is someone who sees and loves and calls and accepts? Why is that so hard to talk about? I think it's because words don't really do it for us at all. And so that's almost all I want to say, because I want to say to you, words don't really do it, but beauty might, and surrender might. Asking and seeking and knocking in order to really not find, but to be found, if we want it. There's lots I could say about emotional needs. I really loved Indra's thing about emotional needs, and as she was doing the list, I was like, yep, that's where I get my security, yep, that's where I get my intimacy, yep, that's where I get my autonomy even. There's a freedom beyond surrender. But I won't, I'll just finish with one quote. And this is by a guy called Paul Kingsnorth, who many of you will know his ecology work. I know that he in recent times has been saying some things that are painful and challenging, so you may feel allergic to him. But if you can kind of hold that in brackets, I just want to read this because he's been on this journey that I've been on and many people have been on through lots of other paths, assuming being brought up in a Christian culture, or whatever the answer is not Christianity, to environmental justice and paganism and Zen and all these amazing rich wisdom traditions, which I definitely do not want to denigrate, right? And I don't want to characterize them as stops on the way for everyone. I just want to say that this guy puts into words something that I feel very deeply, and I'll just leave you with this, having moved my thing. In the kingdom of man, the seas are ribboned with plastic, the forests are burning, the seas are burning. The city's bold with billionaires and tented camps, and still we kneel before the idol of the great God economy as it grows and grows like a cancer cell. And what if this ancient faith is not an obstacle after all, but a way through? As we see the consequences of eating the forbidden fruit, of choosing power over humility, separation over communion, the stakes become clearer each day. Surrender or rebellion, sacrifice or conquest, death of the self or triumph of the will, the cross or the machine. We've always been offered the same choice. The gate is straight and the way is narrow, and maybe we will always fail to walk it. But is there any other road that leads home? Thank you very much.